My name is Daniel Harper, and the night my own son called me a burden was the night I stopped being blind. He didn't yell it in anger, didn't spit it out in the heat of a fight. No, he said it calmly, with the cool finality of someone rehearsing a speech. Those words, "You're just a burden," Dad, didn't just land. They lodged like a splinter under my skin. I remember the sound of his voice as clearly as I remember the rumble of my old Chevy truck when I turned the key afterward. Calm, detached. The way someone might explain why the cable bill went up. Only this was my son dismissing me from his life, like I was an unwelcome guest who had overstayed his visit. But let me take you back, because wounds like that don't come out of nowhere. They're built up over years, one small fracture at a time. It was early November in Spokane, a thin crust of snow still clinging to the sidewalks. I'd driven across town to drop off a set of tools my son Mark had borrowed last summer and never returned. The ones his neighbor had asked to borrow, and he swore he still had somewhere in his garage. I figured I'd just stop by, bring them in, maybe share a cup of coffee with him and my daughter-in-law Allison. Mark's house stood proud on a corner lot, 2 stories, trimmed hedges, Christmas lights already strung neatly along the roofline, though Thanksgiving hadn't even come yet. I noticed the new SUV in the driveway, shiny and spotless. I also noticed my name still etched faintly on the deed papers folded neatly in my glove box, the same deed I'd signed years ago to help him secure the mortgage. Without me, there would be no house, no perfect suburban dream. I knocked. Allison answered first, her smile thin and polite, the kind of smile you give a stranger at the grocery store. "Oh, Daniel. Didn't know you were stopping by. I thought I'd bring back those tools. Figured Mark might need them." I lifted the box in my hands, trying to sound cheerful. Her eyes flicked to the box, then back to me. "Mark's in the living room." She didn't move aside right away, just lingered in the doorway like a guard at a checkpoint. Finally, she stepped back, and I entered. Mark sat on the leather couch, staring at his phone. The TV glowed with some football game, the sound low. He looked up, startled, then set the phone down. "Dad, you could have called." I chuckled nervously. "Just thought I'd stop in. It's been a while." The silence stretched. I could feel the distance in the room like a draft through a cracked window. This wasn't how family was supposed to feel. I set the box on the coffee table right on top of the glossy magazines Allison liked to fan out, Architectural Digest wine enthusiast pages, showcasing lives even more polished than theirs. Mark cleared his throat. "Dad, we need to talk." Something in his tone made my chest tighten. I sat down across from him, the leather sighing under my weight. "What's on your mind?" He didn't look at me right away. His fingers drummed against his knee, tapping out a rhythm of hesitation. Finally, he met my eyes. It's hard to say this, but Allison and I think it's best if you don't come around as much." The words sank in slowly like stones through water. "Not come around," I repeated, confused. "You're here a lot, dropping in unannounced, staying longer than we expect. It's too much. We need space." I stared at him, trying to process. "Mark, I only stop by once every few weeks." I thought, "You don't get it, Dad." His voice sharpened now, cutting through the hesitation. You're kind of a burden. We've got our own lives, our own routines. It's hard to always make room for you." Burden. The word clanged in my head like a church bell. My mouth went dry. Allison shifted in her chair, not meeting my eyes. Mark leaned back, arms crossed, as if bracing for a storm. But the storm never came. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. Instead, a strange calm settled over me, cold and heavy. "I see," I said softly, rising to my feet. My knees popped the sound loud in the quiet room. "If that's how you feel, then I'll go." Mark opened his mouth, maybe to soften it, maybe to explain, but I didn't wait. I walked to the door, each step echoing with years of sacrifice. Baseball games, attended tuition checks, written weekends spent helping him build this very house. My hand closed around the doorknob, cool and solid. "Dad." I turned back once. His face was unreadable, caught between guilt and resolve. Allison's eyes flicked away like she couldn't stand to watch. "Take care of your house," I said evenly. "It's a fine one." Then I stepped into the November air. The cold slapped my face sharper than any insult. I walked to my truck, started the engine, and let the rumble drown out whatever else he might have said. On the drive home, the words replayed in my head. Burden. Again and again until they carved themselves into me. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. The snow outside blurred into streaks under the headlights like the past 5 years of my life, flashing by years spent ensuring that house was his, not the bank's. Years of bending, giving, sacrificing. By the time I pulled into my driveway, one thought had settled into place, cold and clear. Mark had forgotten something. He'd forgotten that the very roof over his head still rested on my signature. He thought I was a burden. But the next morning he was going to learn exactly whose name was on that deed. The morning after Mark called me a burden, I woke earlier than usual. The sun had barely risen over Spokane, streaking the sky with pale pink, but I was already sitting at my kitchen table, a mug of strong black coffee steaming in front of me. The house was quiet, too quiet. Ever since my wife Marjorie passed away 5 years ago, silence had been my most loyal companion. Sometimes it was soothing, but on mornings like this, it felt like a weight pressing down on my chest. I opened the drawer where I kept my important papers. It stuck a little swollen from years of neglect and loose receipts. Inside were the manila envelopes I hadn't touched in months. Property records, mortgage papers, insurance forms, all the things that tethered me to the past. I pulled out the thickest envelope, the one stamped with the county recorder's seal. With careful hands, I unfolded the deed to Mark's house. My name glared back at me in bold black ink right beside his. It all came rushing back. 5 years earlier, when Mark and Allison had been desperate to buy their forever home, the bank had balked at their application. Too much student debt, not enough savings, shaky employment history. They'd sat at my kitchen table, eyes pleading, voices rehearsed with practiced humility. "Dad, it's just the co-signature Mark had promised, leaning forward like a salesman sealing the deal. We'll handle the payments. You won't have to do a thing. But we can't get approved without you." And I fooled that I had signed without hesitation. Not because I wanted control, not because I wanted thanks. I did it because I believed in my son, believed in giving him the stability I'd always tried to provide. I glanced around my own modest house, the same one I'd lived in for 30 years. The siding was peeling the porch. Light flickered whenever it rained, and the furnace rattled like an old man's cough. But I'd paid it off fair and square. No cosigner, no handouts, just hard work and sacrifice. Mark's house, by contrast, was a monument to appearances. Granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, hardwood floors polished to a mirror shine. All of it bought with my name propping it up like a foundation beam. I sipped my coffee and let the bitterness coat my tongue. A burden, he'd said. As if I hadn't carried his burdens for years. I began sorting through the papers, laying them out across the table like puzzle pieces. Mortgage agreements, bank statements, escrow letters. Every line told a story. My credit leveraged my reputation, put on the line. I thought back to the times I'd quietly covered for him. The month he lost his job and the payment came due. The time Allison insisted on remodeling the kitchen and the contractor's invoice landed in their mailbox like a grenade. Each time Mark came to me hat in hand with promises that it was temporary. Each time I'd dipped into my savings, convinced it was just one more bridge until he got steady footing. But steady footing never came. What came instead was entitlement. A sense that I was no longer a father but a safety net to be stretched and tested until it snapped. I pushed back from the table and paced the kitchen, the floorboards creaking under my steps. A part of me wanted to tear up the deed right then and there, reduce it to confetti, scatter it like ashes. But another part, the colder, clearer part, knew that real justice wasn't about rage. It was about precision. I sat back down and picked up a pen. On the margin of the deed, I scribbled 3 words: "Still my house." Not legally, not entirely. Mark had rights too. But without my name, his house was nothing more than a hollow shell waiting for the bank's hammer. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Mark. "Dad, about yesterday. Maybe I was harsh. We just need boundaries, that's all. Talk later." Boundaries. That word again. It rolled around in my head like a marble in a tin can. Boundaries were for neighbors, not fathers and sons. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked to the window and looked out at the frost-coated lawn. Across the street, my neighbor Mr. Wilson was scraping ice from his windshield, his breath puffing white in the cold air. His 2 grandkids ran circles around him, laughing, tossing snowballs, squealing with delight. I felt an ache in my chest watching them, an ache not for the noise or the mess, but for the simple fact of being wanted. I turned back to the table, to the deed, to the proof of everything I had sacrificed. And for the first time in years, I let myself consider something radical. What if I stopped carrying the weight? What if I let Mark feel what it was like to hold the full load himself? The idea settled over me like a blanket. Not warm, not comforting, but solid, firm. I picked up the phone, not to text him back, but to call my lawyer. "Morning." "Daniel," the familiar voice answered after 2 rings. "Everything all right?" I hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Not yet, but it will be." By the time I hung up, the coffee had gone cold, but my resolve had never felt hotter. Mark thought I was a burden. He was about to learn that the only thing keeping the roof over his head was the very man he cast aside. The thing about betrayal is that it rarely arrives in a single blow. It comes as a steady drip, wearing you down, one insult, one slight, one cold shoulder at a time, until the floor finally caves in beneath your feet. For me, the floor gave way a week after Mark called me a burden. It started with a voicemail from Allison. Her voice clipped and businesslike rattled from the speaker as I stood in my garage surrounded by the smell of motor oil and the echo of my tools. "Daniel, we've decided it's best if you don't stop by unannounced anymore. If you'd like to see the kids, we can schedule something, but please understand we need consistency. Thanks for respecting our space." Respecting their space. The words cut sharper than steel. My space had once been his childhood bedroom, the roof I'd fixed countless times, the meals Marjorie had cooked with tired hands. My space had been his safe harbor. Now I was relegated to an outsider who needed an appointment just to glimpse my grandchildren. I sank into the old wooden chair in the garage, the one with the cracked cushion, and stared at the dust dancing in a shaft of afternoon light. My chest ached, but my mind felt strangely detached, like I was watching someone else's life unravel. That night, I drove past their house. I didn't stop, didn't knock. I just idled at the curb, headlights off, watching shadows move inside. Through the wide living room window, I saw the warm glow of lamps, the flicker of the television. I saw Allison bustling about handing out cocoa mugs. I saw Mark laughing at something their eldest said, his head tilted back, carefree. I wasn't angry at the laughter. No, it was the exclusion that stung. My absence wasn't mourned, it was convenient. I drove home with my hands trembling on the steering wheel. When I pulled into my own driveway, the house loomed dark and hollow. No lights in the windows, no voices inside. Just silence waiting like an unwelcome host. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table, the deed spread out before me again. Papers fanned like cards in a game where I finally realized I held the winning hand. I thought about the $60,000 I'd funneled into their mortgage over the years, the contractors' checks I'd written, the credit card debt I carried, so they could keep their stainless steel appliances. I thought about the birthday dinners I'd been invited to late the holidays, where my seat had been pushed further down the table, the subtle signals that I was tolerated, not cherished. Around midnight, I opened my notebook and began to write. Not a letter, not a rant, but a ledger. Every dollar, every sacrifice, every time I had stepped in to hold them up. The numbers filled the page until my pen tore through the paper. By morning, the decision had crystallized. I called Mark. He answered on the second ring, but his tone carried that guarded patience, the kind you use with a persistent telemarketer. "We need to talk," I said. My voice was calm, steady. Too steady. "About what?" "About the house." A pause, then a nervous chuckle. "What about it?" "I've been thinking. Maybe it's time we reconsidered who carries the weight of it." His voice tightened. "Dad, don't start. We've got it under control." I let the silence hang heavy and suffocating. "Because my name is still on that deed, Mark. My credit backs your mortgage. Without me, that house isn't yours. It's the bank's." The line went quiet. I could almost hear his breath catch. Finally, he muttered, "Why are you doing this?" I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tighter. "Because you called me a burden. Because you've forgotten who built the foundation you stand on." The words settled between us like a gavel striking wood. He didn't respond. The silence stretched until it broke with the faint sound of Allison's voice in the background asking who he was talking to. He ended the call without another word. I sat there, the phone heavy in my hand, my pulse hammering in my ears. The bridge had been burned. Later that day, I met with my lawyer. His office smelled of leather and old books, a place where decisions had real weight. He slid papers across the desk, explaining options in his measured professional tone. Remove my name, transfer liability, freeze payments until Mark refinanced. Every option was like a door opening a glimpse into a future where I wasn't tethered to their ingratitude. "Are you sure you want to go through with this, Daniel?" he asked gently. I thought of Allison's voicemail. I thought of Mark's dismissive tone. I thought of the laughter I'd watched from the street, laughter I was no longer welcome to share. "Yes," I said. My voice didn't waver. "It's time." That night, for the first time in years, I slept soundly. Because the breaking point had come, and I was no longer afraid to let go. The papers were signed on a Wednesday. Cold rain tapped against the office windows as my lawyer slid the finalized documents across his oak desk. My signature, neat but firm, sprawled at the bottom of each page. With a stroke of a pen, I had set in motion a change that would rattle the foundation of my son's perfect suburban life. Once the bank processes this, my lawyer explained, his glasses perched low on his nose, the payments fall squarely on your son. If he fails to refinance, foreclosure proceedings could begin within months. I nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. It wasn't vengeance I felt, at least not only vengeance. It was clarity. For years I had been the invisible scaffold holding up their home. Now I had stepped away, leaving the structure to stand or fall on its own. Driving home, I noticed things I hadn't paid attention to in months. The way the wet asphalt glistened under the streetlights, the steam rising from manhole covers. The neon sign of the diner on 5th Street where Marjorie and I used to eat pie on Friday nights. Life kept moving indifferent to my personal war. 2 days later, the first cracks appeared. Mark showed up at my door unannounced, ironic, given Allison's voicemail about boundaries. He stood there in the drizzle, his shoulders hunched, his tie askew. His eyes darted past me into the house as if checking whether anyone else was there. "Dad," he said, his voice tight, "we need to talk." I let him in. He paced my living room, the same room where he'd unwrapped Christmas presents as a boy, where he'd sprawled on the carpet to watch Saturday morning cartoons. Now he looked like a man cornered. "Allison and I got a notice from the bank." He began pulling a folded letter from his jacket. His hands trembled slightly as he handed it to me. It says the mortgage is no longer co-signed. They're demanding we refinance. I unfolded the letter, scanning the lines I already knew by heart. His panic was palpable. They said if we can't refinance, they'll review the loan. And if we don't qualify, he stopped, swallowing hard. We could lose the house. I set the paper down calmly. Yes, that's how it works. He stared at me, disbelief flashing across his face. Dad, you can't just... Why would you do this? You know we can't qualify on our own. I leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers. I did it because I won't carry your weight anymore. You called me a burden, Mark. But you forgot the truth. You've been my burden for years. The words landed heavy. His jaw clenched, and for a moment I saw not the man he'd become, but the boy he once was. The boy who scraped his knee and ran crying into my arms. The boy who begged me to teach him how to ride a bike. Somewhere along the line, that boy had vanished, replaced by a man who saw me as an inconvenience. I didn't mean it like that, he muttered, his voice cracking. Yes, you did. My tone was quiet but firm. And maybe it's time you live with what you meant. The silence stretched. The rain pattered against the window, a steady rhythm underscoring the tension. Finally, he whispered, Allison's furious. She says you're trying to ruin us. I almost laughed. Ruin them. I had been saving them for years. Ruin had only come the moment I stepped aside. Tell Allison the truth, I said. Tell her how many times I covered your payments. Tell her whose money paid for that kitchen she loves to show off. Tell her who made sure your kids never saw an eviction notice taped to the door. His eyes dropped to the floor. Shame flickered across his face. I can't undo what I signed, Mark. You're on your own now. If you want to keep that house, you'll have to earn it. He left without another word. The door closed behind him with a finality that shook the walls. For the next week, the phone rang constantly. Sometimes it was Mark, sometimes Allison. Their voices swung between anger and pleading. First came the accusations, "You've betrayed us." Then the appeals, "Think of the kids." Then the threats, "We'll cut you out for good." I stopped answering. Let the voicemail take their words. Each message was another brick removed from the wall of obligation I had built around myself. But the real reversal came at Thanksgiving. I had accepted an invitation from my sister Rosa to join her family for dinner. Her house was small, the turkey a little dry, the gravy lumpy. But it was warm. Her grandkids piled onto my lap, sticky hands tugging at my sleeves, their laughter filling the air like music. As we passed plates of mashed potatoes and cornbread stuffing, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Another call from Mark. I ignored it, savoring the sound of genuine joy around me. Later that evening, when I finally checked, the voicemail was raw with panic. Dad, the bank rejected our refinance. They said our debt-to-income ratio is too high. We don't know what to do. Please call me back. I set the phone down and looked around Rosa's table at faces lit by candlelight, at love untainted by conditions or contempt. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. The burden wasn't mine anymore. By December, the whispers had started. Spokane isn't a big city, not really. Word travels faster than the wind down the river. Neighbors talk, co-workers speculate, and soon enough, everyone knows whose house is one missed payment away from the bank's hammer. I first heard it at the hardware store. I was in the aisle picking up a box of nails when I overheard two men near the paint section. Shame about the Harpers, one said, lowering his voice, though not enough. Big house like that, and they might lose it before Christmas. The other whistled. Didn't his old man co-sign that place, thought they were solid? I gripped the box of nails tighter, the metal biting into my palm. They didn't notice me standing there, or maybe they did and didn't care. Either way, the truth was out, and it was spreading. Mark and Allison thrived on appearances. Their entire identity was built around that house block parties on the deck holiday lights that made the neighbors jealous Instagram posts showing off their perfect life. The thought of their facade crumbling under the weight of reality was poetic. But fate, it seemed, wanted the lesson to be public. 2 weeks before Christmas, the Homeowners Association held its annual meeting. I hadn't attended in years, but this time I went. The room buzzed with chatter as residents shuffled papers and sipped lukewarm coffee. At the front, the board president cleared her throat, ready to discuss budgets and landscaping schedules. Then a voice from the back piped up. "What about the Harpers?" All heads turned. I followed their gaze to a woman clutching a printout. "There's talk they're behind on their dues. If the house goes under, it'll affect all of us." Murmurs rippled through the room. Faces turned curious, expectant. Mark sat near the front, Allison beside him. His jaw tightened, her smile frozen in place like cracked porcelain. The board president adjusted her glasses. "Mark, is there truth to this?" Allison jumped in her voice, honeyed and defensive. "Of course not. We've just had some banking issues. Everything's under control." That was when I stood. My chair scraped against the floor, drawing every eye to me. "Actually," I said, my voice steady, carrying across the room, "it isn't under control." "Not anymore." Gasps, a few whispers. Mark's face went pale. I walked slowly to the front, papers in hand. The deed bank statements, copies of payments I'd made for years. For 5 years I co-signed their mortgage. I covered missed payments, shouldered their debts, kept this house, your neighbor's house, from foreclosure. Quietly, without recognition. I laid the papers on the table one by one. Each document fell like a hammer. Last month I withdrew my name. The bank has declined their refinance. The mortgage now rests entirely on their shoulders. Allison's cheeks flushed crimson. She half rose, sputtering. "This isn't the place." But the board president raised a hand. "It very much is the place if the stability of our community is at stake." The murmurs grew louder. Neighbors exchanged glances, sympathy mixed with judgment. Mark sat frozen, staring at the floor. I looked out at the room, letting the silence stretch. I carried them for years. I did it because I believed family meant sacrifice. But when sacrifice became expectation, when gratitude turned to contempt, well, I stopped. And now the truth is plain. Without me, the house you all admired was built on sand. A woman in the second row whispered, "Is that why you're not welcome at their Christmas parties anymore?" The words weren't meant for the whole room, but they carried. A few chuckles broke the tension, sharp as knives. Mark finally stood, his voice trembling with anger. "Dad, how could you humiliate us like this?" I turned to face him, calm as stone. "Humiliation isn't what I've done. I've only lifted the curtain. What you feel is exposure." The board president shuffled her papers, clearly uncomfortable. "Thank you, Mr. Harper, for clarifying. We'll note this in the minutes." I nodded and returned to my seat. Mark and Allison sat stiff and silent, eyes boring into me, but they said nothing more. After the meeting, a few neighbors approached me quietly. One older man clapped my shoulder. "Tough love, huh? Sometimes that's the only way." I just nodded, too tired to say more. That night, my phone buzzed with a barrage of texts from Allison. Venom poured through the screen, accusations, insults, desperate attempts to paint me as cruel. I didn't reply. Instead, I poured myself a whiskey, sat by the fire, and let the glow wash over me. The reckoning had come not in secret, but in the open. And though it stung to see my son's face twisted with shame, I knew it was necessary. He had to feel the weight of truth pressing down on him, just as I had carried it for years. The burden was no longer mine to bear. The first sign of real collapse came in January. The Christmas lights were still clinging stubbornly to Mark's gutters, drooping in the wind like faded tinsel, when the foreclosure notice landed on their doorstep. I didn't see it myself. No, I heard it from Rosa. She'd been driving past their house on her way to the market when she spotted the envelope taped in bright red across the front door. Notice of default. Bold letters impossible to ignore. "They're in trouble, Daniel," she said softly over the phone that night. "I hate to see family fall apart like this." I sat in my recliner staring at the muted glow of my television. Trouble. That word didn't even begin to cover it. Trouble was a flat tire, a bounced check. This was ruin staring them down with unblinking eyes. A few days later, Mark came to me again. This time he didn't bother with pretense. He looked older somehow, his eyes ringed with exhaustion, his voice stripped of its usual bravado. "Dad," he said quietly, standing in my doorway with his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. "We're 3 months behind. The bank's demanding full payment." I stepped aside, letting him in. He sat on the couch, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor like a boy waiting for punishment. "Allison's parents won't help," he admitted. "They said it's not their problem." "And Allison?" He trailed off, rubbing his temples. "She blames me. She says I should have seen this coming." I leaned against the mantel, studying him. "Didn't you?" His head snapped up, eyes flashing with something between anger and despair. "How could I? I thought you'd always..." "Always what?" My voice cut sharper than I intended. "Always rescue you. Always dip into my savings while you played house in a palace you couldn't afford." He winced but didn't argue. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the faint hum of the furnace. Finally, he whispered, "We're going to lose everything, Dad." I wanted to feel pity. I wanted to reach across that gulf and pull him back to safety. But pity is a dangerous thing. It keeps the cycle alive, feeds the dependency until there's nothing left of you. Instead, I said, "Maybe everything is what you need to lose." He stared at me, stunned, as if I'd spoken in another language. "Mark," I continued softer. Now I spent years pouring myself into that house, into you. But I can't keep saving you from consequences. You called me a burden. Maybe now you understand who's been carrying who." His lips parted, but no words came. He looked smaller, somehow deflated like a balloon left too long in the sun. When he left that night, he didn't slam the door. He just closed it gently, like a man leaving a room he might never be allowed to enter again. The weeks that followed were brutal. Gossip spread like wildfire. Allison stopped posting her curated photos online. Neighbors noticed the lawn unkempt. The lights dimmed the once bustling house, now shuttered and quiet. I heard through the grapevine that she'd taken the kids to her parents for a while. Just until things settled down, she'd told someone at church. But everyone knew what it meant. She was slipping away piece by piece, leaving Mark to drown alone. Then came the day I saw him at the grocery store. He was in the frozen foods aisle, standing in front of a wall of pizzas, staring blankly, as if he couldn't decide between brands. His cart was nearly empty, just milk bread and a pack of off-brand cereal. When he saw me, his face crumpled. For a moment, he looked like the boy I once carried on my shoulders at the county fair, sticky with cotton candy and laughter. But that boy was gone, replaced by a man hollowed out by pride and mistakes. "Dad," he whispered, voice breaking, "I don't know what to do." I placed a hand on his shoulder, firm but not unkind. "Figure it out, son. That's what men do. We figure it out." His eyes filled with tears, but he nodded, swallowing hard. For the first time, I saw something flicker in him, resolve, maybe, or desperation turned into determination. Either way, it was his burden now, not mine. By March, the house was in official foreclosure proceedings. A letter from the bank arrived by certified mail demanding payment or surrender. I knew because Mark brought it to me, hands shaking, voice trembling. "It's over," he said, collapsing into my chair like a man twice his age. "They're taking the house." I studied him for a long time, then asked, "And you?" He looked up, confusion in his eyes. "What about you, Mark? What are you going to do without the house to hide behind?" The question seemed to pierce him deeper than the bank's letter. For once, he had no answer. I poured us both a cup of coffee, the silence heavy between us. Outside, the snow was melting, the world shifting toward spring. New beginnings if one had the courage to seize them. For years I had carried him. But watching him sit there, shoulders bowed under the weight of his own choices, I realized something. Collapse isn't the end. Sometimes it's the only way to build something true. Spring in Spokane carries a strange kind of beauty. The air still holds a bite of winter, but the snow melts into rivulets that sparkle in the gutters. Tulips push through the soil with stubborn resilience, and the scent of damp earth lingers after every rain. For me, that spring carried something else too, a reckoning that had finally run its course. The Harper's house. Mark's house. Allison's palace stood empty by April. A foreclosure sign was hammered into the lawn, bold red letters declaring the truth for the whole neighborhood to see. The same neighbors who once admired their holiday lights now slowed their cars to gawk at the silence, the overgrown grass, the locked door that no one opened anymore. I drove past only once. Not to gloat, not to savor their downfall, but to say goodbye. Goodbye to the thousands of dollars I had poured into those walls, goodbye to the countless nights I'd spent worrying about their future while neglecting my own. It wasn't my house anymore. It never really had been. Mark moved into a small apartment across town. Nothing fancy, just a 2-bedroom with beige walls and a view of the parking lot. When I visited him there, I found cardboard boxes still stacked in the corners, the faint smell of takeout lingering in the air. He looked different, thinner, wearier. But there was something else too. Something I hadn't seen in years, humility. "Dad," he said when I walked in, his voice softer than I remembered. "I don't expect forgiveness. Not after everything. But I need you to know I see it now. Everything you did. Everything I took for granted." I sat across from him, the cracked vinyl of the chair squeaking beneath me. "What changed?" He gave a hollow laugh. "Losing everything has a way of clearing your vision. The house, Allison, it's all gone. She's at her parents' place now. Says she needs space." I didn't say I wasn't surprised. I didn't need to. Instead, I asked, "And what about you? What's next?" He shrugged, eyes downcast. "A job. A real one. I can't keep pretending life's a party I can't afford. I've already started applying at the factory. It's not glamorous, but it's honest." For a long moment, I studied him. Not the son who had humiliated me, not the man who'd once sneered about boundaries, but the boy I had raised. The boy who needed to be reminded that dignity comes not from granite countertops, but from character. Maybe I said slowly, "This is what you needed all along." His eyes glistened. He nodded. "Maybe it is." That Easter I didn't sit alone. Rosa invited me again, and this time Mark came too. He arrived late, carrying a cheap bouquet of grocery store flowers, looking awkward and unsure of his place. But when Rosa's grandchildren ran up to hug him when the family made space at the crowded table, something in his shoulders eased. During dinner, he looked at me across the table. "Dad," he said, voice cracking slightly, "I'm sorry. For calling you a burden. For making you carry me when I should have carried myself." The room went quiet. Forks paused mid-air. All eyes turned to me. I let the words hang for a moment, then nodded. "I forgive you, Mark. But forgiveness isn't a reset button. It's a foundation. If you want to rebuild, you'll have to do the work." He swallowed hard, then nodded. "I will." Later that night, back at my own home, I poured a glass of whiskey and stood on the porch. The air was cool, the stars bright against the velvet sky. I thought about Marjorie, about the sacrifices we'd made together, about the life we had built with sweat and stubbornness. And I thought about Mark. Not as a failure, not as a disappointment, but as a man finally learning the lesson life had tried to teach him all along. I raised the glass to the night. Here's to burdens carried and burdens set down. For the first time in years, I felt free. To those listening, maybe you felt it too. The sting of being unappreciated, the weight of sacrifices unnoticed. Maybe you've been called a burden by the very people you carried. If you have, I hope my story reminds you of this love doesn't mean erasing yourself. Sacrifice doesn't mean surrender, and sometimes the greatest act of love is letting someone stand on their own, even if it means watching them fall first. If this story spoke to you, I'd love for you to share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe if you want to hear more tales, like mine stories about justice, about family, about finding strength when others try to strip it away. And maybe tonight raise a glass for yourself. For every sacrifice you've made, for every burden you've carried, you deserve to be seen.